Hello everyone and welcome back to another book review. First of all, if you are new here, I post new book reviews almost every single day, so if you're looking for some reading inspiration on both or either fiction or nonfiction books, I post book reviews on both, so feel free to stick around if that sounds interesting to you. Now let's talk about today's book. Today I'm going to be reviewing volume 15 in the series No Matter How I Look at It, It's You Guys' Fault I'm Not Popular. This is what the cover of the series looks like. Technically this is a reread. Back in 2021 I read all the way through volume 16 in this series. However, I then moved and switched library districts and this series kind of got lost in the move and I never finished it. So I am rereading the series right now. So technically I did reread volume 15 because I read it previously. However, I don't really remember a lot about what happened in volume 15. So we're getting to books that even though I read, I don't really remember a whole lot about. And soon we're going to be to a point in the series where everything is new to me. So that's just a little background on the fact that I have read this before, but it really at this point isn't affecting my review because I don't really remember this far in the series. Probably because I read it right before I moved and was very, very stressed about, moving all my stuff. So volume 15. A big focus on the first part of this volume is actually not on Tomoko. So the series up to this point, we've been following Tomoko, who is this girl here. Tomoko is a girl who, when she went to high school, she thought she had this thing figured out. She played a lot of video games where her character was a high school girl, and she thought she was going to have the boys, the popularity, the friends, everything. Tomoko got to high school and things did not work out exactly as she planned. She wound up being very lonely. She missed having a lot of these key connections with her classmates, and she experienced a lot of social anxiety, isolation, loneliness, depression, a lot of really deep, dark things. And I definitely understand why people wouldn't want to read this series because the first couple volumes in the series tend to be very, very dark, as Tomoko is in a dark place where she really doesn't have anybody outside of her family, and it's not a fun place to be in, especially at a time that Tomoko is, or an age that Tomoko is, where she just really wants to fit in with her friends. She really wants to fit in with anybody, and she really doesn't have those connections, and it can feel very lonely and very isolating. So Tomoko is going through high school. However, as she goes through high school, she experiences a little bit of character growth, a little bit of personal growth, and she's starting to make those connections with her classmates. I feel like this series really is overall about personal growth, and it happens very incrementally. It's very realistic. So in real life, when people grow as a person, it tends to not happen all at once, all in one volume. There's not some magical transformation moment like sometimes there is in like movies or other manga series where there's one moment where everything comes together and she's pretty and she has 100 friends and she's loved by everyone and there's 6 men fighting for her attention. Like, that doesn't happen at all. Tomoko's growth is very incremental, and Tomoko as a character is a very flawed individual. She says some stuff that's kind of problematic. She does some things that aren't very cool. She is very judgmental. She can be very cruel at times to other people, especially other girls, as she does this thing where she judges the very thing that she wants. And Tomoko has had to do a lot of growing as a person. She's still not a perfect person. No one is a perfect person. She still does and says things that are not appropriate or right, but she's grown a lot as a person. And while that growth happens slowly and incrementally, I feel like it's more rewarding because of how slow and incremental it is. It both reflects the real world and it gives the reader not this unrealistic moment in time where they just twirl in a field of sparks and everything's perfect in their life, but she really has to grow as a person and work towards it, and it's realistic, and the payoff therefore I feel like for the reader is a little sweeter when we see these moments of growth. However, we haven't gotten to know a lot of her friends very, very well, or we kind of have. We've gotten to know them with Tomoko, but we haven't seen, there hasn't been background volumes on any of these characters' backstories in really any extensive amount. So in volume 15, the first part of this series, or the first part of this volume, focuses on one of her friends that she's made recently, Hina Nimoto. Hina Nimoto. So this is a girl on the cover, well, not on this cover, on another cover, she is not on this cover, who has gotten connected with Tomoko and they're starting to hang out and do things together. And we know her from the class, but we don't really know a lot about her background, maybe how she was in middle school, and that's kind of revealed in the beginning of this volume. And we see that Nimoto did things the way that Tomoko wanted to do things, if that makes sense. Nimoto went through middle school and then went to high school, completely reinvented herself, and she tried to fulfill the stereotypes and the expectations of what a high school girl should be. But you can see that that kind of wears on her. There's a quote on page 46, I wrote my page numbers down at this time, where she says, "But it's not like I'm more at ease now or I'm not having to put on an act." So she's doing everything the way that Tomoko kind of wished she had done things, or how she expected to do things when she went into high school, but it still kind of is an act, and she's having to put it on, and she's not always able to be her real self. At least that's how I read into that comment. She's not able to just truly be herself in the way that Tomoko is, because she's having to put on this act to maintain this facade of being this perfect, wonderful high school girl. I think that also goes to show that Tomoko, who's been looking at the people around her as having their lives completely pulled together, have their own problems and their own struggles, and people like Nimoto, who maybe at first glance she dismissed or judged, is putting on an act and being something that she doesn't always feel or doesn't always want to be. I'm sure there are aspects of her personality that are similar to how she would act, but there are things that she's putting on as an act to be different than how she actually would. So the first part talks about that, or mentions that, and I thought it was really nice to get to know a little deeper someone that has been hanging out in Tomoko's group for a while. Also, and this is something I mentioned in a previous review, and I'm going to reference page 53. Previously, when we saw shots of Tomoko's class or Tomoko's classmates or people in her school, they were just masses of nameless people. They weren't people we knew, and the art, I feel like, kind of reflected that, as they weren't really super distinct people all the time. They were just background characters. However, now when we look at a scene like this, we have all the characters. We see the people that Tomoko has connections with, and I feel like that really happens in real life. When you get to know people, when you get to have connections, then all of a sudden these people who used to be strangers get to be people that you know and have connections with, and yeah, you recognize them. I don't want to say like you didn't see them as people before, but they're people that you have connections with instead of just strangers, and I feel like that's coming through. So I feel like that is just a touch that I can give props to the artist for. Now, this is by Nico Tanigawa, but if I understand correctly, this is a conglomeration. It's two people writing under one name, so the artist of that did a very good job, I feel like, of including these scenes and elements where we see that Tomoko now has connections, and they're not just strangers in the background, but they're actual people that she has connections with. So Tomoko is trying new things, and one thing that she does, and I feel like is very distinctive of her style, is a lot of the girls in their school uniform will roll their skirt up. And Tomoko hasn't done that since going to high school, I guess. She doesn't really do that. But one of her friends convinces her to try that. And as I mentioned before, Tomoko is not a flawless individual. She tends to say and do things that are inappropriate to her friends, things that maybe border on harassment, are harassment. And I feel like once she experiences what it's like to maybe wear an outfit, because she does wind up, her friends convince her to try rolling up her skirt during this so it gets a little shorter, at least to her knee length. They're like, just bring it up to your knees, just see if you like it, see how you like it. And she realizes that maybe some of the things she said and done are inappropriate after she is put in the same position, which I find like is just a moment of poetic irony, especially since volume 14. I feel like she still says and does things that are inappropriate, but I feel like sometimes when what you're dishing out is served back to you, all of a sudden you realize it's not quite what you want. Maybe Tomoko should have realized that a little sooner, I would argue, but she's not a perfect character. She's a flawed character, and she's suddenly getting things that she dished out served back to her, and it's less interest, or she doesn't find it very enjoyable. So we'll just leave it at that. I'll let you read that and come to your own conclusions about that. Finally, at the end of this, we're starting the sports tournament. So this is like some sort of class matchup. It's not the sports festival, if I understand. It's just a sports tournament where different teams or different classes compete against one another. And that's going to take some time. And Tomoko's actually participating. I feel like this happened, there was a sports festival before, if I remember correctly, but Tomoko didn't really participate in that. So now Tomoko's actually participating. She has connections, she has classmates, and it's kind of interesting to watch that change. I also felt like when I was reading the sports tournament, sports matchup in the back, I feel like I noticed that the art style had shifted a little bit, and the artist was drawing Tomoko as a little older. And I did like that because she's supposed to have passed through almost all 3 years of high school at this point. So I appreciate the artist putting those touches in to make her look just a little bit older. I don't know what exactly to pinpoint when looking at it that makes her look older, but I do feel like the artist has made slight changes to make her appear, yeah, older. I keep saying the word older for some reason, but that's the only way I can describe it. I just feel like this volume really showcased the artist and the artist's style, so, and the good work that they are doing in this book. So I did like that, and I did want to call that out. So volume 15 I really enjoyed, and I highly recommend. If you have any thoughts on this series thus far, I would love to hear it. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.